The story of Despicable Me began long before Gru was born, in 1960. That's because the entire universe of one of the best animated film franchises in history started long before humans inhabited the surface of the planet. Millions of years ago, a small group of yellow beings inexplicably developed the habit of following the most despicable being they could find. As ages passed, living beings evolved, and so did the minions. They began walking on two legs, with some having two eyes and others just one, but all of them loving to eat bananas and serving the most cruel being they could find. The detail is that the known minions total 899, according to the franchise creators, and they are practically immortal, as they do not age and cannot be killed.
Wow.
So, as their masters disappeared, mostly because of the minions themselves, they always sought a new, even crueler master to replace the previous one. And after being chased away by their last master, the French dictator Napoleon, and spending hundreds of years without serving any villain, a small group of 3 minions set out in search of a new master and arrived in the USA, where they ended up at the world's largest villain convention and met the sweet, beautiful, and terribly cruel Scarlet Overkill. Bob, Stuart, and Kevin then secured the position of henchmen for the world's greatest supervillain at the time and were given the mission to steal the Queen of England's crown, which they managed to do, with Bob even becoming King of England in the process after pulling the Excalibur sword from the sacred rock. However, after Scarlet tried to kill her own henchmen, they revolted against their mistress, recovered the crown, and returned it to the Queen of England, only for Scarlet to steal it again and for the young Gru to steal it from the supervillain using his freeze ray. In fact, this crown remains with the villain to this day. Upon seeing this, all the minions who were already in England were amazed, and as is their nature, they chose the little boss to be their new master. They then followed young Gru across the Atlantic to the USA, where the new mini-boss lived, who actually did not want 899 new residents living in his house. However, after insisting and putting on a sad face, the yellow beings managed to convince the future greatest villain in the world to accept the group as his servants, and they began to build and structure the mini supervillain's lair. After an interview where Gru was completely snubbed by the Vicious Six, our favorite villain in his youthful and hairy version ended up stealing the Zodiac amulet that the villains themselves had stolen from their former leader Knuckles. After a wild chase, where the mini-boss and the 3 main minions managed to evade the group of villains, they returned to their lair, lost the amulet, recovered the amulet, and Gru ended up being trained by the former leader of the Vicious Six, who were now just 5 villains since Knuckles was summarily expelled at the beginning of the movie. And if you also love the second Minions movie, show us and comment below #villains. Speaking of which, the group of villains manages to kidnap Gru and recover the amulet, which forces the minions to train in martial arts and, along with the mini-boss's mentor, set out to rescue the boy who was tied to the hands of a giant clock. After an intense battle, the minions manage to free the mini-boss, and the AVL then captures the group of villains, but at the cost of the life of the wild Knuckles. At least that's what everyone thought, until Gru's mentor appeared safe and sound at his own funeral.
You can't do anything alone. Find your tribe and never let them go.
After everything was settled, Gru still managed to recruit the much younger Dr. Nefario to work with him and the minions, forming the group we know from the first film released in 2010, when our favorite villain was known as the most daring and successful villain of his generation, until he discovered that another unknown villain was performing even greater feats than him, such as stealing the pyramids of Egypt, for example. Gru then reveals to his henchmen and minions his greatest plan, which he had even before the minions entered his life: to steal the moon. The problem is that to do this, he would need money he didn't have yet, and so his best alternative was to turn to the Bank of Evil, which he had known about since he was a little boy, when his mentor took him there with the two pretending to be grandfather and grandson to steal the Mona Lisa painting that was in the bank's vault. In fact, it's there that we see Mr. Perkins still working as a bank teller, and he would later become the general manager of the organization. And we also see for the first time that Vector already existed and was the son of the future boss of the Bank of Evil, proving that Vector and Gru are practically the same age. Gru then steals the Shrink Ray, which is stolen from him by Vector, and it would be essential to shrink the moon and steal it. As an alternative to entering the super lair of his first enemy, our villain ends up adopting the 3 girls after realizing that they are the only ones who can get in, since Vector loves the cookies they sell. After adopting the girls and starting to get attached to them, and also not getting a single penny, Gru informs his minions that he would abandon the plan to steal the moon. At this moment, the minions mobilize, motivated by the little money the girls themselves had and gave to Gru to achieve his goal. In fact, it's at this moment that we see the Queen of England's crown again, which Gru had stolen from Scarlet in the first Minions movie. At the end of the film, Gru does not steal the moon, as the villain opts to save Margot and live a happy life along the girls, while the moon returns to its orbit, taking Vector with it, as we see at the end of the movie, and in the short Mooned, released by Illumination, where the villain ends up on Mars instead of returning to Earth.
Me arriva la luna. Oh, aspetta, un mano! La mano!
Leaving his life of crime behind and trying to be a respected family man, Gru changes careers and tries to produce jams, but the taste of the product is simply terrible. In the midst of this, the AVL sends Lucy to recruit Gru for a mission to locate and neutralize a villain who has been stealing equipment around the world. This leads them directly to El Macho, an old supervillain who had faked his own death and was now turning yellow and cute minions into purple, ugly, and indestructible minions, with the idea of creating an army for global domination, all with the help of Dr. Nefario, who had left our villain's team. In the end, Nefario switches sides and helps Gru defeat El Macho, and the girl's father and Lucy get married at the end of the movie. And before we continue the story of the Minions and Despicable Me movies, here's a tip. If you haven't subscribed yet, click the button below and join our team of cartoon and animated movie fans. Now married and taking care of the girls together, Gru and Lucy work for the AVL hunting villains. But after failing to capture Brat, a former child villain who loves the 80s, our villain is fired from the organization. At the same time, the boss of the Minions discovers the existence of a twin brother named Dru that he doesn't remember, as their parents separated when they were just babies. Once in the country where his brother lived, Gru discovers, first, that his brother is not bald like him, and second, that their father admired him as a villain since Dru has no aptitude for it, despite having a lot of financial resources. In the middle of the movie, the Minions rebel against Gru because their master has stopped being a villain to be a normal person who picks up dog poop and unclogs toilets, unlike his previous self who stole great works of art and did amazing feats. The Minions then go to prison where they become the dominant gang and terrorize the other inmates. However, when Mel, the Minion responsible for the revolt, begins to remember the happy moments he spent with his master in recent years, the Yellow Beings decide to escape and return to their master. At the end of the movie, Dru and Gru manage to defeat Brat in a final battle against his giant super robot that was destroying Hollywood as revenge for the ex-child supervillain being sidelined after growing up and reaching adolescence, no longer being cute. At the same time, the Yellow Beings manage to help their boss, and Gru and Lucy then get their jobs back at the AVL. Also that at the end, Dru, who wants to be a supervillain, goes out with the Minions to commit mischief, and Gru and Lucy give them a few minutes head start to start chasing them and throw them in jail. After some time, we see that the Gru family is well and happy, and now they have a new member, Little Gru Jr., son of Lucy and her husband. And that's exactly where the fourth movie of the franchise begins, where we see that Gru, now as an AVL agent, captures his former schoolmate and supervillain Maxime Le Mal, who promises revenge and ends up escaping from prison to go after the master of the Minions. We also know that in the fourth movie, while hiding from Maxime, Gru leaves most of the Minions in the care of the AVL, which turns 5 of the Minions into a group called Mega Minions, who have superpowers and are capable of doing incredible things. But all of this is part of the story of the fourth movie that you'll need to watch to find out how the saga of the Minions and Despicable Me continues. And you, have you watched Despicable Me 4? Comment below to let us know. If you haven't watched it yet, or just want to pass the time, we left 2 videos on the screen for you to check out right now if you want. I've heard that the video on the right is really good. If I were you, I would watch it.